Hello, welcome back to the other side of the cell. This is Michael Jackson. Today we got an interview with Anthony, and Anthony and I are just going to talk about, fighting the street beefs and journey through life through incarceration and back to living a good, successful, prosperous life. So, welcome.
What's up?
So let us just start by just talking about how you grew up and how from growing up to get in trouble and incarceration and how that all looked like, what that was.
Yeah. So started my life out in California. I was there until I was about 10 years old. And out there, there wasn't a whole lot of trouble or anything like that. I had a pretty decent life. And my family decided to move to Arkansas. And when I got here, it was like the culture was so different. It's like I went from like one extreme to the other. You know what I mean? Like it was, I got here in the rock, so like gang violence and things like that were real prevalent at that time. And I learned really quickly that basically things are going to be significantly different, like way different compared to how they were at home. So growing up in the area that I lived in, which is Southwest Little Rock, there was lots of gang activity. Um, I was a kid from California, so I like to skateboard, and I ended up getting into a bunch of fights and stuff on the street because they didn't like that I skated, or they tried to bully me and things like that. And uh, I had to basically toughen up. It was when I was younger, I was considered I guess before I got out here, I was really kind of like a soft kid. Like I had never seen anybody fight. I'd never like gotten into anything like that. And coming out here, it changed really quickly. So I had to learn how to defend myself and stand up for myself and things like that. And then as I got older, I guess my grandmother had lost her job. She fell and broke her back, and times got hard because we only had one income. So that led me into a life of crime, basically. I started selling drugs and robbing stores and
What age was
things
that?
like that. I was probably, I think I started around 16 or so,
Okay.
15, 16. And I did it for quite a while, like robbed Walmart, stole like a bunch of like big electronics, computers and things like that. Sold them at school and then, in different areas. And then it just got progressively bigger. I got to where like, instead of just selling a couple of like dime bags, I was selling pounds and just stealing bigger and more expensive stuff to sell it for more and more money. And then uh, crazily enough, I got in trouble. I think it was like shortly after I turned 18. It was literally like probably 3 or 4 weeks after I turned 18. Uh, I got in trouble here in Arkansas. I got put on probation. I didn't do any prison time or anything yet, but I served my whole probation sentence. And then I got off. I got my record expunged and everything. And then, it was like, oh, well, that was easy. It was, getting in trouble was really not that bad. And then I got in trouble again, like probably 7 or 8 years later, uh, selling weed. I got busted with I'd been selling weed for like several years. And the little city that I grew up in, they're real uh, hard nosed, I guess, towards like any type of drugs. It was like a real conservative town, and they didn't like me selling weed, so they were trying to get me for a long time. And I was selling so much. I had people in the courthouse and the police station and everything. So like anytime that they were gonna bust me, like I kind of had a heads up. And the way I ended up getting in trouble was a guy that I had heard originally that he was an informant, and so I wouldn't sell to him for a long time, but he hung around like one of my good friends every day. I was there all the time seeing him. And eventually I kind of let my guard down, and he came to me one day and was like, man, I lost my job. I don't know what I'm going to do. I need some help. I'm about to get kicked out of my place. Can you help me out? And I'm like, yeah, man, how much you need? So I went to give him some money, and he's like, nah, nah, I can't take no money from you. So he was like, just give me some weed and he's like, give me some weed, I'll sell it. And then, I'll get you back later. I was like, okay. So I gave him a half ounce. And then the next day he came and asked for another one. He's like, hey, I got the money for the first one. I'm like, man, you don't owe me. It's supposed to be to help you out. So you need another one. He's like, yeah. So I gave him another one. And then a month later, at like 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to a text message from him. And it was weird because like I worked a full-time job while I was doing it. and everybody knew that I was in bed by like 9:30, 10 o'clock. But I woke up from a message from him asking if I could fix something for him, an electronic, because that's my original trade is electronic repair, cell phones, computers, and things like that. And I just kind of looked at it and didn't reply because I was supposed to be asleep. But I got up to go to work, and when I replied to his message in the morning, it like as soon as I hit send, I just heard like on the door, boom, 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 the cops at the door. I looked out the window, I'm like, dang, that's crazy, So went to jail, and they when I was there, he was with his feet kicked up on the little desk where you get interviewed at. Me and my homie are in handcuffs, and we're like, why does he have a cell phone, and why are his feet kicked up in there?
Yeah.
And long story short, he found out he was the one who he was a confidential informant, and so they got me. They offered me probation or drug court, and I've never been the type to do drugs. I always just sold them. So I asked them like the pros and cons of like each one, and they were like, well, if you do probation, it's going to be unsupervised. You won't have to worry about drug tests or anything like that. And I was like, okay. He's like, but you're going to be a felon. And I was like, okay, well, can I get it expunged? And he was like, have you ever had your record expunged? And I was like, yep. So I was like, oh, okay, well, in that case, yeah, you'll always be a felon. And then he was like, well, you have drug court. And I was like, well, what's the deal with that? And he's like, if you complete drug court, they'll wipe your record. It'll be like it never happened. And I was like, even if I had it expunged? And they were like, yeah, it's like a whole different thing, basically. And so decided to do drug court. And man, that program is really difficult. Like even for people, well, I'm not gonna say for like it's not necessarily hard. Like if you actually do it,
Right.
or like if you don't have a full-time job. My problem was that the city that I was in didn't have a drug court, so I had to drive like 40 miles away to go to drug court. And then my job, like my house was 30 miles in between my job and drug court, so I had to drive 30 miles to drug court every morning, and then 40 miles to work, and then 30 miles back home every day. And whenever I pled into it, they asked if they would make a couple exceptions, because I was like, man, living 30 miles away, it's a 2-year program. I'm bound to run into some kind of issue over this 2 years. So they were like, yeah, we'll work with you as far as like tardiness goes. You can't, as long as you don't take advantage of it. So I made it the majority of the way through the program. I was in the final phase. I didn't have to take drug tests or anything anymore, like often. It was like once every couple months, they would call me randomly to come take a drug test. And I was on my way up there, and I was almost in an accident on my motorcycle. So I had to stop. It made me 2 minutes late to a drug test. I got in, when I called them and let them know, like, hey, I was almost in an accident. I had to stop for a couple seconds, but I'll be there. I'm not going to be very late at all. It's just going to be a couple minutes. They're like, oh, okay, you're fine. So when I got there, they were like, hey, drug testing closed at 10:30. And I was like, well, I called and let them know I was going to be a couple minutes behind. They said it was fine. And they're like, well, you have to talk to the judge on Tuesday. And I was like, well, can I go ahead and take a drug test? So y'all see that I'm clean, so y'all can see that I wasn't trying to get over on y'all or anything. They told me no. And I was like, okay. So I came in on Tuesday for a drug court, and I explained to them what happened. And they had said that I had refused to take a drug test. I showed up and I refused to take a drug test. And I was like, oh, it's a misunderstanding. Why would I refuse to take a drug test in my last few months of the program? I'm about to graduate. They said that if they cut me any slack, they would have to cut everybody else slack. So I started the entire program over. And so 2 years was down the trash. I had to go all the way back to the beginning.
Wow.
And then that was kind of the beginning of like, oh man, this sucks. And then, I did the same thing again. And my mom and her boyfriend ended up coming from Mexico. And she had come before he did, and he caught a bus. And when he caught a bus, I went and picked him up at the bus station. And, I'm just picking him up. So, I didn't think there was anything wrong. I got him. He threw his suitcase in the trunk. We left. A few weeks later, they pulled me into my probation officer's office, and she's like, hey, you're under investigation for a theft. And I was like, what? How's that possible? And they showed me a video of him throwing the suitcase in my car, which he had stolen. It wasn't his. He just saw it and grabbed it and threw it in my trunk. And so they were basically like, while you're under investigation for this, you're going to be in limbo. You're not going to make any progress in this in drug court. So you're going to be doing everything that we require of you, but you're not going to make any progress. So you're just going to sit here until this case gets resolved. And once that case gets resolved, then you can start your progress again. And I was like, man, there's I've been in trouble before, and it takes a little, like, sometimes over a year to finish to finish a case, to close a case or whatever, to get
Right.
the verdict. So I was like, what, I don't want to do this. Just like, what's the consequences? And they're like, oh, you go to prison. And I was like, yeah, I've been doing this for 4 years now. I'm over it. I don't want to do it anymore. So that was before I knew that they give you the maximum sentence for failing this program. And I
Right.
had two charges, consecutive days, two distribution charges. The maximum sentence on each one was 6 years. And they stacked them concurrent instead of consecutive. And for the people who don't know what concurrent is, you have to serve like each sentence individually, basically, instead of stacking them on top of each other. Um, so yeah, it went from there. I grew up kind of poor and did what I had to do to get by, put food in the house and take care of my little sister, and it just progressively got worse and worse. And then I got jammed up, you know what I mean? And
So did you actually physically have to go to prison?
oh yeah, yeah. So that day at court, whenever they told me that, when I told them, I didn't want to do the program anymore, that's when they're like, oh, okay, well, you sure you don't want to do it? I'm like, yeah, I can't do too much prison time. I didn't think it was going to be some years. I thought it was going to be a few months. And he smacked the gavel. He's like 12 years ADC. And I was like, hold up, whoa, 12 years. Like, and I didn't know that you only had to do a portion of it. 2 years is still a long time, I feel like, for an ounce of weed.
Yeah.
But uh yeah, that day I went to jail. They handcuffed me right then and there. I got in the cop car, they took me to the county, and then that's when I started my sentence. 2 years.
So what was the first like when you walk into prison and you have to figure that all out? How do you navigate prison?
In prison or jail? It's
But
like it's both. It's like two different worlds, really. Prison, jail. It's weird because, like, a lot of people that I talk to, I feel the same way. Honestly, like, will say like I would much rather be in prison than jail if I have to do an extended period of time. And I agree with that, because jail, in a way, it's a little bit more wild because a lot of people know that they're going to prison anyway. Uh, I don't know. It depends really on, I guess, where you're at. But for some reason, when I was in county waiting to go to jail, I did like 6 months before they sent me to the actual prison. And I got moved like 3 or 4 times. So I started in one county and I did like a month and a half there. And then I did another county and a month and a half there. So when you first get in there, like, it doesn't matter like where you're at, prison, jail, like whenever you get to a new unit or you get to a new barracks, or wherever you're going to be staying for that time being, like, first you're going to start off in like a holding cell until they get you where you're going to go. Boring if you're in there by yourself. Sometimes if you're not in there by yourself, that's not too bad, because most of the people are going to be like drugged up, or they're going to be sleeping in there, and then you get put back in your barracks. It's a really uncomfortable feeling. It's very, yeah, especially if you've never been before. It's like you don't know what to expect,
right.
because you never been there before. You're in there with a bunch of dudes. You don't know what they've done. If there are guys in here for murder or rape or theft, or you know what I mean. So you just kind of have to go in there and kind of look around and just kind of analyze everything. At least that's what I did. And I kept to myself for a couple of days, and after a few days, a couple of guys would come up to me, hey man, what are you in here for? What are you doing? I guess, like, trying to check my paperwork to see if I had done anything just, I guess, like, that they didn't agree with, you know what I mean? And uh they it's really it's interesting for sure. I wouldn't recommend going, but it's an entirely different world, you know what I mean? It's nothing like being out here, but it's like you're on edge for quite a while. And then, just as soon as I would get comfortable in an area, I knew everybody. Like the first one, it wasn't too terrible. The food was all right. I got to know some people, and we got to watch UFC I think it was every other weekend. Like one weekend would be football or basketball, and the other weekend would be UFC. And then, like, one of the shifts was pretty cool. Like, they would let us set all our mats out because these guys found out that I had fought out here, and they let us set all of our mats out, and I was teaching them jujitsu and a little bit of striking and stuff like that. And the guard that was on duty on nights, she was like, "Man, if one of y'all get hurt, that's on y'all. You know what I mean? Like I didn't know what was going on in here, so that one was pretty cool. And then I got moved from there to a smaller like federal holding facility, and it just started the whole process over again. You know what I mean? It's and that one, it was kind of funny my first day in there because I grew up in Southwest, which is like it's a community full of minorities. A bunch of Mexicans, Black people. There's not a whole lot of white people in the area that I grew up. So when I went into the cell, and it's a predominantly white town, uh, in the cell, there's one Black guy in there. He looked like he was from where I was from, and in his cell, there's two cells in this barracks. There's one on the right and there's one on the left. And then I think it was a 4-person barracks, and there was like 7 people in this pod. And there's like mats all over like the day area, which is where people spend most of their day. They play their games, they eat, things like that. And on the right side, there was one bunk where the guy was staying on that, it looked like he came from where I'm from. And then there was one on top where all of his stuff was at. And on the other one, the white guys had their stuff. Both of the bunks were taken up. It's like they were afraid to talk to him. So I walked in there. I was like, hey, man, I was like, you don't mind if I get that bunk, do you? And all the white guys are just kind of looking at me like, oh, man, like, is this dude about to beat him up? I'm like, he's like, yeah, man, I got you. I'll move my stuff just to, put your bedroll in there, and I'll get to it here in a little bit. I was like, all right. So I put my bedroll in there. We got to talking. We're from like pretty close to the same area. He's from the east side of the town that I'm from, and I was from the southwest side. So we knew all about like the area that we grew up in and things like that. But him and I got pretty cool, and that was the first time in that pod that I'd actually seen. You hear stories about people attacking like people who have like child sexual crimes and things like that. That was the first time I had seen something like that happen, and it's crazy, like the way that like inmates are. They're very smart. You know what I mean? Like knew the guy was uncomfortable and he didn't want to talk about it, but they like befriended him and they talked to him, and they ended up getting it out of him, and they made a plan. Yeah, they made a plan with the guy next door, which is he was a barber, and he was waiting to go to the feds, but he had been in and out a few times, and they made a plan. He came over, cut his hair, and made him look real nice, and made him feel real good about himself. And after that, they beat the crap out of him with the clippers, and man, that was like the first time like I had actually felt like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? Like what if I do something that they don't agree with? Not that I did anything like that, but like I said, it's like it was like an eye-opening moment, you know what I mean? And then I got moved again, and like I said, you start the process over again. You got to get to know everybody, and then I got to.
Excuse me, but did you have any confrontations or fights when you were in there?
I had like 3. I had like 3 or 4 altogether, but luckily none of them were too bad. Like my very first day, well, it wasn't my first day. Like my first day in actual prison, I guess like the intake unit. I was there, and I spent like 2 weeks. It was really busy. I spent like 2 weeks in a solitary cell because I guess that's where you go before you get put in your intake barracks.
Right.
And man, that was torture to me. I like to talk, you know what I mean? I like to just see people. I just, you know what I mean? Like, it's just being in that cell. I had no window. I couldn't even see out my cell. Like there was no window into the cell block or anything. Like I was just in this room. I didn't know what time it was. And the only way that I ended up keeping track of the days was when the food came. I would count every breakfast tray that came in. So I was in there like 16 or 17 days by myself. And, it doesn't seem like it's that long, but when you have nothing to do, I think like my first day, I read like 3/4 of the Bible my first day. And then my second day, I drew an exact replica of my cell, like down to the graffiti and everything, like the number of bricks, all that. And then my third day, I started exercising, and I didn't realize that we only get 2 showers a week. So I was pretty stinky by the time it was time for my shower. Uh, and I only had that one pair of clothes they gave me when I first came in. And, finally 2 weeks later, I got put into intake barracks, and, I found out that people are schemers in there. This guy was like, hey, man, let me borrow a couple envelopes, and I'll get you on commissary day. And I had never been to prison, so I didn't know you're only going to be in there a couple days. So I gave him like 10 envelopes, and he's like, I got you commissary day. He was gone the next morning. I woke up and he had been shipped out to his unit. You know what I mean? So I was like, dang. And one of the guys that I had like made friends with that shipped down there with me, he's like, man, you should have known better. I'm like, dude, I ain't never been to prison. The longest I've ever spent in jail is a few days before this. And he was like, oh, dang. He's like, you got a long road ahead of you, man. I was like, yeah, I guess so. So
I don't trust anyone.
yeah, like it's you really gotta spend some time with someone in there to actually build some sort of trust. I mean, I was real naive too when I first went. Like, um, you know, I when I first got there, I had never seen anything like that. So in my mind, I'm like, man, this is nothing like TV. I don't see no gangs or nothing like that. And after being there for like a month and a half, 2 months, I had made a couple friends, and one of these guys, I would run the yard with them. We'd go out there and we'd run every day. And where I was running with him one day, and I was talking to him about how it didn't seem like it was anything like on. Sorry about that. I was like, it doesn't seem like it's anything like on TV. And he's like, what do you mean? I was like, man, I don't see any gangs or nothing like that. And he started pointing out all the different gangs. He's like, oh, those are, that's the Bloods over there, and that's the Crips, and that's this, and that's that. And I'm like, oh, wow. I can kind of see like the little cliques now, you know what I mean? But like within my first couple of days actually in prison, I went through a whole range of emotions because my first intake unit, you're in there with a bunch of class fours, you're in there with a bunch of people who just first got there. And yeah, I'd never seen like I guess like there's gay people in there. I'd never seen one that like acted like a girl or been that close proximity. And you hear these stories about zuzus and wham whams and people putting stuff on your pillow. And my very first day, being of Mexican origin, I had a gay Mexican guy come up and talk to me, and man, I didn't know what to do. I'm like, oh my God, he's gonna try to do something to me. So like he's trying to talk to me in Spanish, and I'm like, dude, I don't speak Spanish. And like I'm just trying to keep to myself because that's all I had heard before I went. Just keep to yourself, mind your business, be respectful, and you'll be all right. I'm like, okay. And so I ended up going. This is like my first day after this happened. I went down to the bottom to take a shower, and I'm walking up, and this guy's like arguing with this dude about I can't remember if it was a honey bun or a pack of donuts. But the other guy didn't want to pay him for it, and this dude just like he had like a broom handle in his hand. He snapped it in half and just stabbed this dude in the face. Like it was a lot, man. It's just like 3 or 4 feet in front of me. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh my God, dude. Like I gotta make it through 2 years of this.
Yeah, the
You
small
know?
things in there will get you killed or hurt you.
Yeah, little things there are big. It's about the principle out there. It's the respect. 50 cents, a dollar there that's a lot of money. You know what I mean? And if you're not gonna pay it back, they feel like everybody else is gonna, they're gonna start to run them over too. You know what I mean? So they feel like they gotta prove themselves. Like little stuff, man, or huge things in there. Um, the only confrontations I got into one because one of the guards had recognized me from out here because I've been on the MMA circuit out here for quite a while, and one of the guards had recognized me, and he was like, "Oh, like I've watched you fight before." And then somebody else heard, and this dude was like, "Man, you do MMA?" And I was like, "I mean, yeah, I used to, And he was like, "Well, just because you do that doesn't make you tough.
Right.
That doesn't mean you're gonna make it in here." And I'm like, "Man, I didn't." I'm not saying I'm gonna make it in here. I'm not saying anything like that. You know what I mean? Just because I trained out there doesn't mean I think I could beat anybody up, which is pretty cool. That's an interesting part of martial arts to me is, most people who've been training and fighting, they're fairly humble most of the time. You got a small handful of guys that aren't like that. But my man, just because I fought out there in the world, like doesn't mean that I feel like I'm gonna do anything in here. I'd rather avoid it and try to go home because I know if I get in trouble, I'm gonna end up doing more time. So
So,
he just what's up?
so what do you think that taught you? What did it take away from you? But what did it also give you by going through that experience?
Going through prison?
Yeah.
Oh man, honestly, is it's a fairly popular saying. Don't do the crime if you can't do the time. You know what I mean? It's like I've always been like a realist, and I knew that eventually I would get in trouble. Nobody can sell drugs or rob stores or anything like that forever and not get in trouble. I mean, I guess some people get away with it forever. You know what I mean? But that's very far and few in between. You know what I mean? If you think it can't happen to you, it definitely can because like when I went up. I'm in the back of the cop car on the way to jail, like getting ready to go to prison, and the cop didn't take my phone. So I sent a message. I posted on Facebook. I was like, well, I'm on my way to prison. Like I post on my way to prison. See you guys in 2 years. And, none of my family knew that I was going. Nobody knew that I was in trouble. Like of all my family, like I come from like a lot of people who are on the wrong side of the law. You know what I mean? And I was the only one that as far as they were concerned, I was never going to go to prison. I was never going to go down that path. You know what I mean? And I when I made that post, they're like, no, you don't get in trouble. You're not going to go to prison. And I was like, yeah. Then like I was like, I'm definitely going. I got 2 years, and then 2 years later, I get out and I commented on the same post, like, what's up, everybody? I'm back. But yeah, if you don't think it can happen to you, it definitely can. I don't care how smooth you are. And all it takes is like, just from seeing my family and like me. And like I said, I didn't get in a whole lot of trouble. It was just a series of unfortunate events. You know what I mean? Like, at least that's how I feel. I did sell drugs. I did break the law. But as far as like me actually going, like compared to other people that I know and have physically seen, there's people who get hundreds of chances, you know what I mean? And I got in trouble one time after I got out, and they were trying to give me 15 years just for having a similar charge. And I've seen people that are out who have gotten in trouble over and over and over and over again and never actually been to prison. You know what I mean? So it's like, in a way, I feel like it's luck of the draw. But if you don't have money for a lawyer, or if you're not ready to do the time, like I would highly recommend trying to keep your nose clean. You know what I mean?
Right. So what do you think your turning point was after that? What made you want to just not do that anymore?
Straighten up. Honestly, that time in solitary when I first got in there, that 14, 15 days,
Yeah.
that time right there, I realized, like there were several points where I was like, this is definitely not where I belong. This is where I shouldn't be. But that first part when I was in there, like it was like I was like, dang, this is terrible. Like that's the worst part for me, really. And then like seeing somebody get stabbed in the face, like I was like, dude, I'm not about this life, you know what I mean? And then just like lots of little experiences. And when I was in there, I had lots of like, let's see, like they came and told me I was eligible for a program that would get me out in 105 days. So I did this program. I get to my 103rd day, and then they pull me into the warden's office and they're like, hey man, we got good news and we got bad news. What do you want first? And I was like, give me the bad news first. And they're like, you're not eligible for this program. And I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, well, you have to go back to the unit. And I was like, okay, uh, so what's the good news? And they're like, the good news is you don't have that much time, so you're not going to have to do much more time. And I was literally like, I think I was like right there on the very borderline of not being eligible for the program as far as how much time I had, because you could only have like a maximum of 12 years. And, so I had like the most time of everybody in the entire program. So once I got done with this, I still had like, I think it was like 13, 14 months left to do. And they're thinking I only had like a few months left, like 3 or 4 months left to do. And then another thing that happened while I was, what, like when you're there, they have this thing in prison called classification. So when you get classified, it brings your time back to you. So when I first got locked up, it said I wasn't going to get out for 12 years. And then once I went to prison and got my class, it came back a little bit closer to me. And then I got, class one. And when I got class one, it came all the way, as far as it was going to come, which was 2 years, when I would be eligible for parole. So I didn't get my class when I went to boot camp. And so now at this point, I had been in prison. I did my like 6 months or so in county, and then I did like another 3 or 4 months in prison before they came and got me. So now I'm almost at a year, and then I get kicked out of the program because I wasn't eligible because of something that they overlooked. And then I had to start my whole classification process over again. And they have what's called host squad. I don't know what they do at other prisons, but you have to do host squad when you first get there before you get your class. And you go out there with the hoe, and you have to cut the grass with the hoe. You know what I mean? And you're out there for like 8 hours a day, you know what I mean? And you have to like do it in rhythm. You have to step at the same time. And it's like, it is hard labor. One thing though, that I will say about prison that, it taught me being there and getting out is that, if I can survive there, like I can survive anywhere. I can endure anything out here because just all the things that I saw while I was in there, all the things that I had to do, nothing out here will compare to that. No matter how hard times get out here, like I saw some stuff in there, and like I said, host squad, I did host squad, I think 3 or 4 times, and most people have to do it one time unless they get in trouble again. But I did it 3 or 4 times. So, and that's 60 days. So it was like, I did like most of my time before I went to work release in host squad. And it was not fun. But like I said, it definitely made me stronger, I guess, like not only physically but mentally too. And yeah, after doing all that time and then them like just finding out like basically they could make all the choices for me when I was in there. Like, oh, you're not eligible, so you don't get credit for this time and you don't get your good time. So you're gonna end up being here a little bit longer than you thought you were. So I couldn't control that, and then I got wrote up for having my bed not made properly one day. So that set me back like another 60 days. And I finally got to work release, which like there you can make money for when you get out, to try to put yourself on your feet better. That's actually where I got wrote up in for my bed not being made. You're supposed to do, I think, 90 days altogether there on a unit job. And then after that, you get a job. And they charge you rent from the first day that you get there. So by the time I got a job and started working, I'd owed like 4 months of rent. So all of my checks, like most of the money was being taken out of that. And then, that was the first time I had like a bunch of money on my commissary account. So I'm spending a bunch of money on commissary every week, eating good. And when I got out, after being at work release for like 6 or 7 months, I I had like $70, I had like $70 to my name. And here you get $120 if you don't go to work release when you get out at the gate. It's like you get a gate check or whatever I guess to get a bus ticket or some clothes or whatever.
So how would, like you said, you fought in Streetbeefs, MMA and all that. So how do you think that helps channel your energy? Like when you're, you might have anger issues, you might have whatever, but channeling your energy into something positive like that, how's that work? How's that?
Oh man, it's honestly fighting, mixed martial arts in general. I don't want to say fighting because to me it's not like I've always been like a real calm, collected fighter. I'm not like an angry guy. I'm not in there to try to take somebody's head off. But like I'm a cerebral fighter. I'm very organized, or I think a lot when I'm in there. I try to figure out the puzzle, and once I figure out, where you're open and what you're doing, um, that's where I get you. I basically try to outpoint people. I'm not going to say I'm boring. Some people are boring when they try to outpoint people, but um, it's honestly like being in there. My little brother, he was on the wrong path when I got out, and when I got out, he was like close to 300 pounds, and he'd been telling me, man, the whole 2 years you were gone, I've been in the gym every single day. I can't lose weight. Help me out. So I took him to the gym. I worked out every day with him for like 90 days. I got him from like, it was like, he was like 286. Got him from like 286 down to like 220. It was like 3 months, 4 months.
Yeah.
And, I was teaching him how to box. I was teaching him how to, grapple. I was taking him to jiu-jitsu gym. And that's when I first like realized that I like to teach. And, here it's pretty cool, like I said, because I'm still in the same area that I grew up in, when I went to prison, the town that I was in was like 40, 50 miles away, but I'm in the town that I grew up in now. And there's a lot of troubled kids here. There's a lot of kids who are out in the streets. They're starting to get to the age where they want to get involved with gangs and things like that. And I honestly can say that like my favorite thing about teaching boxing is like keeping the kids off of the street, giving them something to do, you know what I mean? Because here being tough is good. You got to be tough, especially like in the school that's here. They just combine like three of the worst schools in the area into one big school. You know what I mean? So like my nephews and like some of the kids that I teach in boxing, they tell me about how bad it is. How often kids will pull out guns in the bathroom just to show them they got guns and things like that. I'm like, man, that's not good. Try to stay away from that stuff. Come to the boxing gym and stay out of trouble. And it's really rewarding, you know what I mean? Getting to train kids and teach them to do something good with their life and to give them hope, outside of gang violence, outside of things like that, it's pretty cool to me. Especially like when you have two kids that are like, I've got two kids that I've been training that are like national level competitors, you know what I mean? They've been to national tournaments. One of them is about to go to Golden Gloves. I think next week, National Golden Gloves in Las Vegas. And then the other one in January. She's a 15-year-old. She just got back. We went in January to Kansas City, Missouri, for a national Silver Glove title. So, yeah, it's exciting, man. Getting to see some positive changes. Getting to, I guess, instead of like being known as the guy who went to prison, and like being known as the guy who gets to help pull kids in and make them feel like they have a purpose in their lives.
Yeah. So here's a two-parter then. So what do you think people got wrong about you when you first came on? and how do you keep going when things are getting to you or you're
Um,
having bad days?
I was pretty lucky, honestly. Like I've always been fairly straight and narrow, you know what I mean? So when I got out, like most of my family, they were pretty sure that I wasn't going to get in much more trouble. They were pretty sure that I wasn't going to do anything like that. My biggest problem or my biggest worry when I got out is when I was in there in some of these programs, they would talk about recidivism rates, which is the rate at which people come back to prison. And some of the inmates would tell me how terrible police treat people who have been to prison, you know what I mean? And that was my biggest concern because I'm not gonna lie, I've had a lead foot my whole life. I speed. Uh,
Right.
I've tried to calm down. I haven't had I'm knock on some wood, but I haven't had any type of traffic violation since I think like 2019, 2018 or so. It's been quite a while for me. That's like a long time for me. That's something to celebrate about. But up until then, I was always one ticket away from having my license suspended. And when I got out, like I said, I was a little bit concerned about having to deal with police if I got pulled over and things like that. But when you get out, like as long as you are doing what you're supposed to do, you know what I mean? Like it's not too hard to stay out of trouble. I only had one bad experience. It was with a rookie cop. I was on my way home from jujitsu. It was probably like 9:30, almost 10 o'clock at night, and I was coming through a city not that far from me because my jujitsu was like 40 minutes away from me. I got pulled over. We're talking. He's like, where are you? I still have my gi on, and he's like, where are you coming from? And every other time I've ever been pulled over, I let them know in advance, like, hey, just so you don't have any surprises, I'm on parole. And then the conversation will kind of go from there. What are you on parole for? I'll kind of explain it to them, and then, whatever. This one particular time, I forgot to let him know that I was on parole. We talked for like 15, 20 minutes, and it was cool. Everything was awesome, and he was like, he was getting ready to let me go, and he's like, real quick before you leave, look, let me see your license and registration real quick. I'm like, okay. So I hand him my stuff. His partner comes over and grabs it. He takes it back to the car. I'm still talking to him. Everything's cool. And then his partner like yells out the window, he's on parole. And he snatches me out of the car and like slams me up against I had an SUV at the time, and he slams me up against the truck, and he's like, man, he's like, what are you on parole for? He's got his gun out and everything. I'm like, what the heck, dude? We were just having a good conversation, dude. If I was gonna do anything bad, I would have done it already. And it basically ended up calming down and was like, he was like, man, I'm sorry, I'm new, so I'm a little on edge, especially with everything that's going on. There was a couple like police involved shootings and stuff like that around that time. And, I think a lot of cops were on edge and a lot of the public were on edge with police officers and stuff too. But for me, like I said, that was the thing I was most worried about. And I've only had one bad experience, and I think I've dealt with police several times, been pulled over and gotten off a couple times even. Like I have a motorcycle. I told you I had a lead foot, well, I guess a lead wrist, because at the time I was going like 140 and like a 60. And he pulled me over and was like, man, why were you going that fast? I was like, I'm not gonna lie, dude. I was late for work. And he was like, well, I appreciate you stopping. He's like, I know you didn't have to on this thing. And I was like, well, if I wasn't late for work and I had time to get away from you, I was like, I'm gonna be honest. I was like, I probably wouldn't have stopped. And he was like, well, he said, I'm looking forward to next time then. And let me go with the warning that time, which was pretty lucky. And I slowed down after that. But yeah,
So
what's up?
go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's been the most difficult part for me, or it was. I feel like what I thought was gonna be the most difficult part was the dealing with police officers or anything like that when I got out. But staying away from, stealing anything, like I said, I've always had my trade of electronic repair to fall back on. So, and like the companies that I've worked for, I've got a pretty good reputation with them. So I could call them today and be like, hey, I lost my job. They'd be like, oh, well, when do you want to start? So,
Right.
uh,
So if you could talk to your younger self today and talk to, let's say, your 13 or 14-year-old self, what would you tell yourself?
oh man, First off, invest in Tesla, invest in Tesla, invest in Bitcoin. Put a lot of money in places that I know are going to happen. But most of all, man, is there's ways to make it besides what you're doing. You know what I mean? Honestly, I probably would tell myself to get started in fighting a lot earlier, like organized martial arts a lot earlier, because my first day doing mixed martial arts. uh, I realized it was something that was going to play like a real heavy part in my life. Like that was the first time I had ever lost interest in skateboarding, like legitimately lost interest in skateboarding. Because I grew up skating. I skated since I was like, I think like 6 years old, all the way until I was like 23, 24. You know what I mean? And uh, when I started martial arts, like I said, I realized it was going to be a really, really play a big role in my life. And now that I'm out of prison and I'm doing well, I've got a good job. I've got quite a bit of money saved up, and I'm actually currently looking for a location to open some sort of gym. I'd like to get something like Scarface has for Streetbeefs, you know what I mean? The neutral corner boxing where he lets everybody come for free, and it's basically a place for kids to come and train and get better and fellowship and just hang out, you know what I'm saying? A place for them to go and stay out of trouble, basically, you know what I mean? Something that's different than your everyday community center, like not just basketball and things like that, actually, get to channel their energy elsewhere. Like, for aggressive kids, they can be aggressive in there, at the right time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if you can channel that into something positive, all of
Yeah,
it would be different and better.
exactly.
You know.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, what do you think to kind of bring this all together? What do you want your legacy to be?
My legacy, so I've been like keeping myself from turning pro pretty soon, or like for a long time. I've kind of been on the fence about turning pro in boxing. Um, and like MMA, like I've always been known for like fighting anybody, anytime. Like I'll take whatever. I didn't never cared about my record, but I definitely like here soon in the next March. I'm planning on entering Golden Gloves as an elite competitor or whatever. I can't remember what the name of the division is for my age group and all that. I'm planning on doing Golden Gloves. The last guy I fought was he's a national Golden Glove champion. I did really well with him, and the only thing that I felt like held me back with that fight was the fact that I was a little concerned with him being a national Golden Glove competitor. And so I kind of kept my foot off the gas. So in March, I plan on going and beating him and going to nationals because if he makes it every year, and I didn't have any trouble with him, I feel like I figure it's gonna be fairly easy for me to make it. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna turn pro. I'm gonna win a couple pro fights. I'm not getting any younger, so I got to do that real quick. I got maybe 3 or 4 years max left in me. I'm gonna do that. I want to open a boxing gym, and I want my legacy to be, basically you can come back from anything in life. You know what I mean? As long as you get your head on right, as long as you are willing to make the effort to not fall back into those old habits, that you can make something good out of any situation. You know what I mean? Like I didn't have the worst life growing up, but when I was real young, I had some pretty bad stuff happen to me, and a lot of people use the same stuff that I went through as excuses to use drugs. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I got to do this because this is how I feel. Um, like there's other ways. You know what I mean? There's definitely other ways, and if you're willing to do it, if you're willing to not take the easy way out and to use these substances or to mask these feelings with just anything other than, what I'm saying, like stuff that's not illegal, basically that you can turn any of that into a positive, basically, you know what I mean? Like people they've asked me in the past, what would I change about my childhood? And I tell people all the time, like I wouldn't change a thing because, without that stuff, I honestly feel like I would not be the person that I am today. I feel like I wouldn't be the inspiration that I am to some of these kids. You know what I mean? Because I like with the story that I have, going to prison for a couple of years for what I did, a lot of these kids are like, "Dang, how is it? Da 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 da." It gets them like uh curious. It gets them curious, and like they start to ask questions, and I can tell them, like it wasn't any fun. You know what I mean? This is what happened, and if they want to know a little bit more in depth, I'm happy to share something with them. Like sometimes I gotta ask their parents, like, hey, some of the stuff that I saw in there was a little graphic. You know what I mean? Are you okay with them hearing these stories? Um, and a lot of times they're like, yeah, like if you think it's gonna help them stay off the path, then go for it. do
Yeah.
what you're gonna do. And but like I said, you can come back from anything in life, any type of situation, any type of upbringing you had. If you get into something positive, if you get into some sort of sport, some sort of activity, mixed martial arts, if you have anger issues, I highly, highly recommend some sort of martial arts because it's a way to channel your energy. You can hit stuff and not get in trouble, you know what I mean? And yeah, like I said, you can make a positive out of any type of upbringing.
Yeah. So I think that and telling these stories of different people that have overcame and stuff like that, it's going to help hopefully somebody out there see that he went through it. He looks like me, whatever, and I
Yeah,
can do it. I can do it. So
yeah,
that's just the key to trying to get that out there to the younger guys and things that guys that are on the edge where you can just pull them back from the edge.
yeah,
So that's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's what my message is for.
No, it's awesome. I think it's awesome what you're doing, man. I watched a few of your videos, and I think you got a good it's a good what's the word? Your heart is in the right place, you know what I mean? And it's pretty cool seeing someone because you said you worked in prisons and stuff for your life, for quite a while, right?
Yeah,
And
27
so
in a prison.
yeah, so you've seen both sides, you know what I mean? You've seen the outside, you've seen the inside. You've been inside. I'm sure you've seen some of the things that I've seen and
Yeah, I've seen a lot of horrible things. I've
yeah,
had family members in there, and it's hard to watch a family member come to prison and what they're going to be facing.
yeah, it's to me like it's pretty cool too because like I said, I was the last person of like all my siblings and everybody that they expected to go to prison, and I went and I did the time. And like my younger brother, he's a little bit less than a year younger than me, and he was on the wrong path. He was the one that everybody thought was going to go to prison, and I got out, I did my time, I got out, I get off parole. I'm still on parole, by the way. Like I got in trouble in 2015, and I don't get off parole until 2027. So but I've done most of my time. I'm on the back end of it. And my brother has seen, like that I've done my time. I got out. I'm doing good. I got a lot of money saved up. I've got a great job. He sees the things that I'm trying to do. I've talked to him about like, the businesses I'm planning on starting, which, God willing will be hopefully by the end of the year I'll have something good rolling. And then by the end of next year, have a few more things going, you know what I mean? But I did want to start some sort of program. It's a little bit for me. I feel like it's like I feel like I'm biting off a little bit more that I can chew. But eventually, I would like to start some sort of program for people who have gotten out of prison because I know we have now like some reentry programs, things that help people get out of prison. But I would like to start some sort of program that gives like apartment complexes or jobs employers some sort of incentive basically to hire people who have gotten out of prison because that would make it so much easier like getting out and like realizing that a lot of apartment complexes will not rent out to people
Right.
who have been to prison, you know what I mean? It's you basically have no choice but to either find like a landlord who has his own properties who's not affiliated with the company or staying with family. So that's something it was a kind of a lot for me to absorb. Thank goodness I had some family that allowed me to stay with them until I got back on my feet.
Yeah.
But um, I would like to do that in the long run eventually. You know what I mean? Or maybe even like once I get a boxing gym, like put some sort of small apartment complex in the back or something like that and have them help out with the kids or something like that, once they pass like certain criteria, of course. But
Right.
like I want to give back to the people who get out so they can see that like your only option is not going back to prison, you know what I mean? Like if you want this you can do it, you know what I mean? We're here to help you, you know what I mean? Look what I've done, you can
Yeah.
do it too.
You could have a path, but you got to give people hope.
Exactly,
They don't have hope; they have nothing. So
exactly.
got to give them that little glimmer of hope and hope they attach themselves to it.
Yeah, yeah,
That's kind of like my theory. Um, just watching guys go in and come back and do the cycle. I tell them, you're doing 5 to life, you just don't know it yet.
yeah,
You're doing a life sentence, you just keep coming back. So you got to
yeah,
just break that cycle of repeating over and over and over and over. And
yeah,
you look up and you're an old man, and
yeah.
you don't have anybody.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like that's another thing that really surprised me about going is like I didn't think in the 2 years that I had done, or like it was almost 2 years, but in that period of time, like that period of time, I didn't think there was enough time to see people leave and come back. But there were some people that I had seen leave and come back like 2 or 3 times just in the time that I was in there. You know what I mean? So like obviously they weren't getting in serious trouble, but I know they had to wait in county to come to the unit, and then you know what I mean. Then they would have to do their time in prison, and they would have to find a parole plan, and it's if you think you're just gonna get out and get in, or get in and get out, like that's not the case. There's some people, and the way it works here, I don't know if it works there the same way. Is like if you're a low risk person, the halfway houses they won't take you. They will not take you here if you're low risk because I guess they feel like you're gonna do right and you're gonna occupy a bed for too long. I guess they get money off of everybody that comes in and out of the door. So the higher risk people they're more willing to take, which is crazy. I was in there with the guy who he was like in a similar situation as I was. He had been eligible for parole for like 7 or 8 months, and he couldn't get a halfway house to accept him because he was the lowest risk there was. You know what I mean? And eventually he ended up going flat, and they had to let him out because he did all of his time. But like, that's like a stab in the gut. Thinking that like, oh, I'm eligible for parole now. Like a halfway house is gonna get me any day, and then you got to do months past when you're eligible for parole, which parole is a privilege, but still, you know what I mean. It sucks, not having anywhere to go.
Yeah, you're kind of being punished for being a good person.
Exactly.
Right thing. Yeah. So I just want to thank you for your time, and I thank you for doing this, and we'll get it out and get it up, and hopefully it helps somebody. And in closing, do you have any last thoughts?
Man, get your heads on straight, guys. You know what I mean? Like I said, it's prison is not fun. And if you've been to prison, there is life after prison. You know what I mean? There are ways to go other than going back. You know what I mean? Just keep your head on straight, keep that glimmer of hope, like he said, and you can do it. You know what I mean?
All right. Well, I guess we'll leave it at that. Well, if you like what we're doing and you like the content, please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the other side.
All right. See you next time.